Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. As a civil servant, I cut my administrative teeth handling one crisis after another, whether it was post-militancy Punjab and a humanitarian crisis where thousands of migrants came to Delhi and other parts of India and they had to be provided relief, or even while that was ongoing, we had a fresh crisis and we had migrants from Jammu and Kashmir, post-militancy 1989, descending on Delhi, and the administration stretched to its wings, finding relief, shelter, etc. for them. But that's one kind of crisis, that's man-made crisis. And then there are crises and other kinds of crises. So fast forward 25 years, and I will mention one episode which is very fresh in everybody's memory and put disaster management in perspective and try and identify the role that youth can play and the leadership that they can provide in reducing loss to life and property. 25th April 2015, a Saturday morning, just the beginning of summer. And here was I sitting in my house, one of the rare weekends when I was on my own and I was looking forward to a nice Bollywood movie planned in the afternoon. But suddenly everything went awry and the ground shook. I heard faint screams from my kitchen as my maid in her Bengali language said, "Jal jala, jal jala." And I think it was the Kathmandu. I did not realize what was happening at that point of time. But somebody was in the living room and the TV was switched on and it said 7.9 on the Richter scale, earthquake hits Kathmandu. All I knew was that I have to get to office. And I knew that this was the fault line in the Himalayan belt and the repercussions or the aftershocks will keep on occurring and they will affect states in India as well. And at that time, I did not know the kind of humanitarian aid which India would mount for Kathmandu. I just rushed to office. Within 10 minutes, I was in office because my house happens to be very close to office. And there, on the way, I was ringing up other colleagues to get to office and to reach the control room immediately. So luckily, we were able to establish contacts with the Indian side of the disaster, which is Bihar, West Bengal, parts of Uttar Pradesh and Sikkim and that area. And we realized that there was damage, there were deaths, but the brunt, the greatest, the epicenter of the earthquake happened to be near Kathmandu, and there was no news from there. There was absolutely a complete breakdown of communications. At the same time, Government of India decided that we must rise to the occasion and help our neighbors. What seemed the most Herculean task at that point of time was search and rescue, and how to make sure that people who are trapped under debris are extracted and given a chance to live. That seemed difficult, but fortunately that turned out to be the easier part, and we were able to send our force, the specially trained National Disaster Response Force, within 6 hours to Kathmandu. It landed. Our 16 units of the National Disaster Response, 16 teams of the NDRF landed in Kathmandu within 6 hours of the disaster having struck, and they were most successful in retrieving live persons from under the debris. In total, only 15 lives could actually be saved. Number of deaths ranges from 7,000 to 9,000 or beyond, but people who were actually retrieved from under the debris were in all 15, out of which the Indian Disaster Response Force retrieved 11 live persons. So that was a huge, I would say, sense of satisfaction that one felt at having been able to come to the rescue of our neighbors. But what was happening here in India at that particular point of time was that my control room in the office in Safdarjung Enclave was inundated with calls. People of Nepalese origin living in India, or Indian people whose families were visiting Nepal or living in Nepal, everyone calling up to try and find out the status of what is happening to their loved ones in Nepal. So our communication lines were jammed. We immediately called for volunteers, and we got them from civil defense, and 15 lines were opened within a short span of time, and 5,000 calls were registered in the next 3-4 days. Now, we are moving in the post-response phase. I am just illustrating Nepal to say what are the lessons we learned and what is the role that the youth can play in preparing ourselves better for dealing with disaster. After that communication system was completely disrupted, we sent ham radio teams from India. Ham radio operators were pulled out from Hyderabad and from West Bengal and sent to Kathmandu to establish a rudimentary framework for communication, along with, of course, the satellite phones which the NDRF was carrying. So communication, establishment of communication happened at different levels. And mind you, these ham radio operators were people like you, and they were the ones who could reach Nepal. Of course, the government provided them transport and all of that. And communication was established. And then, of course, the next lot of activity which started was this humongous offer of help which came from the community. We had truckloads of water waiting to be flown to Nepal. We had ready-to-eat food like puris and parathas being made available to us from spiritual organizations like the Gurdwara committees, etc. And every kind of stuff that you can imagine you would need within 24 hours of a crisis. And how do you transport that? So in the initial phase, of course, it was the Indian Air Force who managed to send everything, But day 2 happens, and you suddenly realize that you have 20 trucks of water parked outside Palam, and there is no need of water in Nepal because there are alternate sources available over there. And here you have another crisis then, which is how do you manage these 20 odd trucks of water? What do you do with them? They have come with great humanitarian expectation. And what do you do? And then the truck drivers, they cannot leave the truck, they cannot go anywhere, and they're in a high security area, so they need food. So you have to arrange food for them. So the challenges in dealing with disasters evolve from minute to minute, hour to hour. And not only at the site, but off-site as well, where people are trying to garner support for the people handling disasters. And so on and so forth. So water became less of a priority, and suddenly we realized that we need tents. We need tents of a sturdy kind because the monsoon is fast approaching, and unless we provide tents, people are going to have to face another kind of disaster, which will be death due to, after effects of rain and disease and contamination and, epidemics and all of that. Toilets, mobile toilets. So what are the kind of resources that you need to mobilize and make sure that they reach not only Nepal, but are actually utilized by the community? And I tell you, that was the trickiest part. Sending stuff to Nepal was the easier part of the job. We mobilized air resources, we mobilized trains, we mobilized trucks. By road, 2,000 trucks crossed the Raxaul border carrying relief materials to Nepal. But cut forward to Nepal and what was happening there, entire stockpiling of relief material. And I will give one example, RO plants for water filtration. 5 RO plants were sent in the first lot, could not be retrieved for the next 5 days because they got pushed to the back of the warehouse where it was offloaded at the airport. Now this is where the community comes in. This is where the youth come in. And this is where they have to organize themselves from before as to what is the kind of activity that they should engage in with the organized response to disaster. And the more you prepare for a disaster, the better response you will have in the post-disaster phase, and the less the loss of lives due to disaster or in the aftermath of disaster. So whether it is food, ready-to-eat food in the first few hours, or it is the running of community kitchens, because people have been rendered homeless, their houses have collapsed. The first flush of rescue and search and rescue is over. Now people have come out and they are in the camps and they have no houses to go to. The people who are worst affected by disasters are old and infirm and young adolescents, and in particular girls. And therefore, the protection of the girls, whether it is in terms of simple provision of dignity kits for them, or it is protection against all kinds of social and sexual harassment kind of situations which may arise in such camps, etc. And the role of the community was watched with great interest by observers of the post-disaster response phase. And I must say that things moved, but come out of that and see what is it that we take away from such a crisis. And what we take away is that typically we must prepare ourselves for disasters. So there is a pre-disaster phase where you prepare, and there's a post-disaster phase where you respond. In the pre-disaster phase, this hall, each one of us is a responder, and we have a responsibility that we must know the hazard vulnerability profile of the area that we live in. What is a hazard and what is a vulnerability? Hazard is something that you can't prevent, really, and you kind of live in seismic zone 5, or you are in seismic zone 3. But vulnerability is when disaster strikes, when earthquake happens, what kind of building are you living in? Is it going to collapse and hurt you? Earthquakes don't kill. It's collapsed structures which kill. And therefore, as an aware community, as an educated community, as leaders of that community, it is our responsibility to understand the hazard vulnerability profile of our area, demand that there be legislation to provide, a particular kind of design which is seismic proof, and then demand implementation of those laws. That's preparation, that's awareness, that's an aware demanding community. And that's the role of leadership. Thereafter, when you know you're living in zone 5, whether it is earthquake or it is cyclone or whatever, or if you're vulnerable, then you have to prepare. And you prepare by identifying vulnerable points, identifying leaders, identifying resources, drawing a plan on how these resources are going to be mobilized, having communication systems, amateur operators, ham operators, community radios. All of this has to be done by the community, and the community which is most prepared will suffer the least losses, whether it is in terms of life or it is in terms of properties. And I will give you one example, and I think that bell was a reminder for me to get out of here. So I will just give you one example on what the role of leadership really means in this kind of a situation. 1999, super cyclone Odisha happened. Do you know the extent of damage that cyclone had? 10,000 people lost their lives. The damage to property was in billions of dollars. It was, the unfortunate part is that we still, now we are better equipped, but then we didn't have a system of computing losses in a very scientific, empirical manner. However, that was 1999, and devastating situations occurred, and the crisis continued for many months thereafter. 10,000 deaths. And thereafter, some things happened. The government of Odisha, government of India, the district administration, the local administration, which is your panchayat administration, and the communities, and the youth, and the leaders of those communities, they put in place systems of evacuation. That warning systems were installed by the government of India. So you have very precise warnings now. You have 5 days advance notices for cyclones, and you know that on such and such day, depression is happening and moving inwards, and the landfall will be on a particular date, at a particular time, at a particular place. And there may be still scope for improvement of that warning system. From being off mark by 200 kilometers, we expect it to be brought down to 20 kilometers. However, with that kind of an information system available, the next step is to pass that information on to the community. And how does that get passed on? Of course, the Doordarshan does it. Of course, the private TV channels, satellite channels do it. But do they have reach within interior areas? No. So therefore, you have the role of ham radio operators or the community radios who pass on the message in their local dialects. And the people listen to that and they accept it, that it is a warning for them to take action. And what is the action to be taken? Shelter spots have already been constructed. So get out of your homes, get out of lower lying areas, and get into the shelter homes. And therefore, the shelter homes have to be constructed, they have to be equipped. People have to know that there is a road to get to that point. And if that shelter home is like 5 kilometers, there has to be transportation available for the communities to be evacuated. And all of that is locally arranged by the local leadership. 1999, 10,000 deaths. Cyclone Hudhud happened in 2014. Before that, Cyclone Felin happened in 2013. 14 years of working with the government systems in terms of warning systems, communication systems, building infrastructure for shelter, and building with the community, working with the communities to make them aware, to prepare them, to equip them. Number of deaths in 2013, 21. How did that happen? Thank you, thank you. So that's the power of the community. That's the power of working together as leaders in the government and in the community, and the role of the youth leadership in this entire achievement story cannot be undermined. And my only wish is that when the next cyclone happens, somebody can stand here and say you, number of deaths, 0. Thank you.
tGELF, leading the change.